Okay, so welcome everyone to this Therapist Connect broadcast on our YouTube channel. My name is Peter Blundell and I'm one of the co-leads here at Therapist Connect. So we're looking at developing some of our free content on our different platforms. So please have a little look at our website for further details, which is running across the screen at this moment in time. So today we have one of our career reflections interviews where we talk to somebody about the impact that they've had kind of on our profession and a bit about their work and their career so far. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Eugene Ellis. Thank you, Eugene, for coming to do this with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Not at all. So Eugene is the director and founder of the Black, African and Asian Therapy Network, also known as BAATN. Which is the UK's largest independent organisation to specialise in working therapeutically with Black, African, Caribbean and South Asian people. Eugene trains as an integrative arts therapist and has worked over the years with children and their families in the field of fostering and adoption. And Eugene has recently released a book called The Race Conversation, which I have my copy here. So we'll be having a bit of a discussion about that at some point in the interview as well. So yes, thanks Eugene very much for coming and talking to us today. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So I suppose a good starting point might be to kind of go back to kind of like your beginning of your career really, and kind of maybe what drew you to become a therapist in the first place. Kind of how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I started with my own therapy, being in therapy myself.
Mm-hmm.
In my late 20s, early 30s, I made a decision really to just be more active around my mental health rather than sort of letting it drift. Mm. Even though I was relatively successful in the work that I was doing, in my body, I could just feel that I was consumed by a lot of fear. Yeah, and fear was really inhabiting me really quite strongly. And also my body gave me lots of signals that something wasn't quite right. A backache at a really early age, really. And, you know, since then I've been having lots of treatments on my back, osteopathy and so on. So I really understand my back now, but, you know, it sort of gave out. So there was kind of lots I needed to attend to. And I started therapy. I just looked in time out and just found a therapist, the one that was close to me, and just went along. I think at that time, I didn't really have many relationships in my life. So the work was really everything. And I wanted a loving relationship, a soulmate, a partner. I wanted to raise children. I needed to know that I could do that with sort of emotional positivity. And my journey led me to really becoming more consciously aware of of my skin, actually, a sort of deep-rooted suffering in having dark skin. And I realized that there was just so much more for me than that was actually happening in my life at that time. And, you know, through a process of therapy, I attended lots of groups, lots of strange groups, group therapy stuff, and also individual therapy. And yeah, it just sort of made me make better choices, really. I just felt a bit more control in my life, felt my power, and I got sort of more in touch with my creative self and who I was, my vulnerabilities. You know, there was just so much more. There was just so much more to me than fear, and so it was a really powerful time for me. I mean, it was done in the context of the therapy world as I know it now, and you know, becoming a therapist myself was more of a sort of body decision, really, rather than a conscious plan. Felt like my body led me, and I found myself on a training course, and I sort of found myself doing all this stuff, which I hadn't really consciously thought what would it look like at the end. I hadn't really. It just felt sort of compelled to continue. Actually, my own self-discovery through the training, through therapy training, and And yeah, so that was my my entry into becoming a therapist. I had to then reconcile being a therapist, being a black man, being a man, and being a therapist, and those didn't go together in my mind at the time. I didn't know anyone else who was doing that, pursuing that. Although I did, towards the end of my training, I did find a black man, and I had therapy with him. So that was a really, really good experience of just experiencing him inhabiting that body and the therapist's body. So yeah, so that was my journey.
It sounds like quite a long journey there in terms of that starting off with that idea of self-exploration and maybe having some questions, but then almost leading on to more kind of questions, and then kind of reconciling that with your own journey of exploration, but then also then how that then transfers into your journey into becoming a therapist, I suppose.
Yeah, it was a lot of therapy. When I count up the years, it must be 15 years or so. I was in a group for 5 years, which again was very seminal, really, for me. I was really in the early part of my sort of therapeutic journey, and all of these groups were in a sort of white context because that's what therapy was around in those days. But there was this particular person in this group who just seemed to get me on that level, being a black person in the world and what that means. Several steps in front of me, this was a white lady from South Africa. So it kind of brought me into therapy in a very unusual way, I think, for black people. I just assumed that this was what therapy was about, and this person really led me into aspects of my blackness, which was a bit strange, being a white person, but that's just how it was. And so that initial experience was kind of carried me through another couple of years, and with doing all kinds of different things. And yeah, so it was a long journey, and much of it within a kind of a group context as well. I thought the group context, just actually watching people. In some ways, when I first went to these groups, I just thought, oh, this is like Coronation Street. This is like EastEnders. So people are really emoting in this way that I've never really seen before, being really vulnerable, telling their stories in this way. And so it was a bit of an eye opener that real life was like this at times, and made me sort of question actually, the emotional ranges that I was exposed to. And that it was mainly around fear and self-defense and staying away from stuff and being careful. So it was a long journey, and again I learned.
I think that's really interesting to hear about that, and also a little bit what you were talking about earlier was kind of like that embodied sense of how you felt through that process and how that kind of guided you in certain directions, potentially in terms of going to see a therapist and then maybe training to be a therapist in the end.
Yeah, there didn't seem to be much of a thought process. I just felt compelled to attend to something that was happening. When I reflect back, I would say it was probably depression that I was going through, or being depressed. Certainly, life felt a bit grey, a bit lifeless. I mean, practically speaking, I was earning money, things were going well in the work that I was doing. So, outwardly, yeah, people would see, oh, right, he's doing all right, he's got his car, his house, he's got all this stuff. And, but that wasn't my internal experience. And I think I am a very sort of introverted, reflective person. I like ideas. I like, I like to chew on knotty problems, and I'm interested in how people work and how I work. So I think I just had the temperament for it as well. So I think there was a number of things that led me there. But I think but certainly, just booking on these events, booking on these courses, booking on these therapy things, just it felt very implicit what was happening. Of course, I was bringing my rational self along as well, but that wasn't really what was driving me.
Just as you're talking, I'm just reflecting on my own journey to become a therapist and thinking at the start, accessing all those different courses and different groups, and just something resonated with me there when you were kind of saying it, almost that implicit development that is happening, but maybe you're not always consciously aware of it as it's happening at the time, maybe. Particularly for me at those earlier stages of training, I think. Yeah. So that kind of was what drew you to kind of the profession in the first place, and how you kind of started your therapy training and that journey to become a therapist. But can you tell us a little bit about kind of then once you've kind of qualified, what your career has been like since then? What kind of you've done over that time?
I've kind of just done one thing, really. I mean, as soon as I qualified, I just went straight into working in adoption and fostering. And I started with a company who were looking for integrative arts therapists. So I thought, do people look for these people? And but there it was. And so I think I was quite lucky in terms of just being in the right place. I mean, initially I had been working in private practice, and I was then called into this organization to work with a particular family. And then while I was there, I was just quite stunned. I was quite taken aback. I was quite impressed by how they were working with families. So instead of working with children individually, they were working with family. And I just thought, well, yeah, this just makes so much sense. Why would I can see the value of working individually with children, but there's also quite a lot of value in working with them in a family context. So I asked them for a job, and they said, yeah, we're hiring. So I started there, and I've worked there ever since.
Wow.
So I started there in 2004, and I mean, I've left the place that I was working, but there was a lot of learning there for me, a lot of learning around just working with families, a lot of learning about working in a team, working on my own as well, working with trauma, I guess, which is that I really began to dig into trauma. Lots of opportunities to go on workshops and lectures around trauma. It was a bit weird sometimes being the only black guy in the room, but that's what it was. And yeah, just having this environment in which to work felt quite a privilege in some ways, but it was very difficult. It was traumatized children in families is not an easy thing to do. So I really had to, again, I think my body coming to the rescue. It felt in some of those sessions where words just weren't going to cut it, and I had to think about my tone of voice, how am I speaking, where are bodies in the room, danger, life threat, those kinds of things were very, very present all the time in the work, and how people were feeling internally, internal dysregulation or regulation, trying to regulate people through activity, through the arts. And when they're regulated, then their minds might work again. Their cognitive minds might become more clearer, and then we might be able to do some work, some more sort of therapy, I suppose, traditional therapy. So that model was always very present throughout the work of regulation, and then cognition on the top of that.
Had you always been drawn to kind of in the integrative arts way? Because as an approach, is that something you'd always been drawn to, or was it something that you kind of fell into?
I mean, my my job before a therapist was, as a sound engineer,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a musician as well. So I spent a lot of time listening to music, recording music, mixing music, and the music was all around. So originally I wanted to become a music therapist.
Ah.
That was but then I had to do, being a music therapist means you have to be able to read music and do kind of recitals, which wasn't really where I was at.
Yeah.
So I had to do, and then this, using the arts in education and therapy
Mm-hmm.
came up as something on the radar. I thought, oh, this looks really interesting. And it was music, and it was also the other arts, metaphor. So those things were always very interesting to me. And so I did it initially as just a course that was being run.
Right.
Maybe I could teach. Maybe I was thinking, but it was actually the beginning of as a first year of a psychotherapy course.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, I'll just continue. But so I think I was led in through my music, and the power that I saw that around music, and its therapeutic power. So that's what drew me into the arts more generally, and the movement, and using metaphor in the various ways that we do as integrative arts therapists.
I'm just thinking how powerful that must be as well, working with the children and families that you've worked with who've experienced trauma, and how working as an integrative arts therapist, how that modality or approach would be quite beneficial to children and young people.
Yeah, no, it was really invaluable. And we would start with that approach. Of course, there is a psychodynamic approach that needs to come into that as well, and the thinking part, and then the coherent narrative part. But yeah, no, that was invaluable in terms of engagement. And the families, universally would say when they came to our service that this was the place for their children. They just knew it. The children wanted to come to therapy, if you can believe that. They wanted to be there, so that
sometimes that's an achievement in itself, isn't it?
That is an achievement in itself, yeah. And this idea of attaching to a group of people who you're doing therapy with, that's kind of seen a bit as taboo. You're not really supposed to attach to, but that was also part of the work. Creating these attachments, breaking these attachments. There's a lot of work around all of that. Not breaking them, but saying goodbye, saying hello, all of those things, which actually were the heart of the difficulties of some of these children, was around those attachments that they had in the past that didn't work. And so, fostering an attachment and then managing it was really using the arts as well. It's a great way of doing that.
I mean, really challenging and difficult work, but I do get a sense that you really enjoyed that work and got a lot from it as well.
Yeah, no, I did. I mean, you didn't, I guess being a therapist, you don't really see change that, you have to wait years sometimes to sort of see things shift, or sometimes they're quite quick. But there was a lot of satisfaction in me with that, because I think it just seemed to fit who I was. And yeah, I think that was the important thing, and I seemed to be good at it. People valued what I was doing, or what we were doing as a team. Yeah.
Fantastic. Is there any particular aspect of your career that you're particularly proud of, or that you kind of are really, happy that you were able to do that?
Yeah, I've been consulting with parents, actually, with adoptive parents who have adopted either black children or mixed race children, and they might be white or mixed race themselves, or black children too, or black parents as well. And so that combination really of supporting them just with this idea of adopting, and having this, the process, the paradigm shift that you have to make as a parent when your child is being traumatized in a quite intense ways. It's quite a journey for parents, or for any human being, to go through that transition of seeing the world in a completely different way than you did up until that point in your life, and then bringing that realization to parenting is a massive challenge. But it's also, of course, if you're raising a black child or a mixed race child, again, there are other challenges, and again, I can bring something useful to that as well. So it's a sort of, it's a really good synergy of what I feel I'm really good at, and can support people around. So yeah, so I think I'm probably most satisfied with that aspect, where I'm using a range of things that I focus on.
Yeah, absolutely, and really important work. Just kind of moving, I suppose, slightly away from kind of your career, and just thinking about the profession maybe a little bit more broadly. And I was just wondering, because I've asked other people this when I've been chatting to them, just kind of what maybe your perception of the profession is, and how it maybe has changed over the course of your career as a therapist, really, and maybe if you've got any reflections on that at all.
I mean, I qualified in 2002, and then got UKCP registration in 2004. But I mean, actually, as I was training in the late, 98, I think I started. There were no trainings for children. Well, there was a psychoanalytical training for children, but apart from that, there were no other than there were adult training. So I was doing an adult training, and halfway through, something happened. Some political thing happened. I don't know exactly what, but I imagine it was, people pushing for, working with children in different ways, maybe more creative ways, maybe more person-centered, humanistic ways. And so I felt like I was on the beginning of this wave of working in this way with children. And then since then, I mean, things have really blossomed, haven't they? I mean, there's child trainings. There's still not that many of them, to be fair, but there are quite a few, and it's allowing children to be worked with in various different settings. So that's been really positive in some ways. I mean, the other side of things is that there's a lot more sort of regulation that has come in. I remember when I was doing my placements, or I was seeing therapists, I was seeing clients when I was training. The things were much looser then, and now it sort of feels like, if I was going to go through a training right now, that it would be a lot more. There'd be a lot more regulation. You can't do this. You can't do that. You need to do this before you can do that. Now, some of that is useful and helpful. Some of it feels very bureaucratic. But I think and it sort of feels like things are getting more and more like that as therapists. And I can see, on the one side of things, I can see that's beneficial, because on one level, it's there's a sort of breaking down of the hierarchy of who's who. We've got maybe the lonely counselor somewhere at the bottom, and then maybe psychiatrist somewhere at the top, and there's a sort of this rung of power structure around therapy and access to resources in the NHS to do therapy. So there is a sort of evening out, if that's the right word, through a lot of this legislation. But it also comes with maybe being more uniform, trying to be more uniform, and that's sort of hamper creativity and the range of people, the range of humans that we are. and this idea of trying to find something that one size fits all, that we can put into a sort of factory model. Again, so that's, that is the downside, I guess. But yeah, so those have been the changes that I've seen.
Yeah, I was thinking then in terms of what I feel I've learned kind of teaching counselling and psychotherapy is seeing such a diverse range of students come on the course and all become very unique individual therapists in terms of how they interpret the theory and their way of being and all of that kind of thing. And so that really resonates with me in terms of I can understand, yes, some of the security and kind of standardizing certain things, but actually it can almost kind of restrict people in terms of their creativity, I suppose, and how they are as therapists. So yeah, I really appreciate that point actually. And do you feel that, and that's something you feel like you've seen has almost been like a trend over the course of your career within the profession, maybe?
Yeah, I think there's been. I think there's sort of two ends, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit like society itself, really, isn't it? There's a sort of polarizing of diversity and huge diversity and difference in approach and people who are practicing, and a sort of a pull the other way to unify and make things the same and package it into something that's deliverable. And measurable. So yeah, they're both operating, aren't they?
Yeah.
A bit like a society right now, being polarized in those kinds of ways as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then how we as individual therapists have to try and navigate that ourselves, which is a challenge anyway outside of the profession. And
Yeah,
then we're going to do it in the profession as well. Yeah. Absolutely. So kind of moving on to my next question, which is which I've mentioned a little bit at the beginning. So you are the founder and the director of the Black, African and Asian Therapy Network. I think it was set up in 2003, if I'm correct.
2003.
2003. Could you talk through a little bit kind of what led you to set the network up in the first place? Maybe tell us a little bit about it for maybe anybody who doesn't know.
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and often I don't really know what motivates me. My body just sort of seems to lead the way, but I've had to organize it in my mind. So, but I mean, during my training, and a few of us sort of came together who were Black or Asian to support each other in the training that we were doing. There wasn't that many of us. There may be 4 or 5 of us. I went to the training institute to let them know what we were doing, and I also asked for space for us to meet. And this was the beginning of a really interesting journey, really, of observing, that interface of blackness and whiteness that we had set up. And what got evoked, in the white people who were running the institution, and what gets evoked, when that happens in a white institution, and people of color meet in groups, what happens for people? Just noticing what happens, and then also thinking about, well, what is it that we actually get from meeting? I mean, we said, oh yes, we're going to meet, but what is it that we get from it? We feel pulled to meet up in this way. But yeah, so all those questions started to come out, and I had to think through the why of it, which again was really interesting. And what I came to was that there is an unconscious reenactment of something that was generations old, and that we were all, bit part players really in this sort of larger social construct of race, and our bodies were like puppets, really, just dancing to some tune. But it was deeply rooted in the past, and that was so I was just sort of thinking around all of that, but my focus was on getting the training sorted, and so it was just permeating in my mind. And then when the training ended, I think that maybe unconsciously I just wanted to recreate the group that we had during the training.
Okay.
Although BAATN was initially set up as a directory, so I was asked when I finished my training, people would phone me up and say, "Oh, do I know of a therapist, in South London, a black therapist?" And my answer was always no.
Mm-hmm.
I knew one other black male therapist, who was my therapist in Acton, and I knew a few other Asian therapists.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, at that time I thought, oh, there must be a directory somewhere that I could refer people to, but there wasn't. And so I don't know, I just kind of set one up, really.
Yeah.
And I got some funding, a small bit of funding. Between the time of my doing my music job and being a therapist, I was also doing a lot of computer training and stuff. So I kind of got to know about websites. So I constructed this website and invited people to be on this directory. Of course, I didn't really realize how many people I was expecting. I was grossly underestimating the amount of Black and Asian therapists that were in the UK. So when we got to 100 people in the directory, or 100 or so, it was suggested that we meet face to face, and then the network was actually born at that point. What really came to the fore was actually people's concerns around training, people's concerns around students not getting through on their training, starting and then dropping out. So the energy then came to address that in some way.
I'm thinking about that idea of safe spaces, really, and kind of creating something that is safe for all those different therapists or people who are thinking about being a therapist. And one of the things that I read when we'll come on to your book in a minute, but which I was reading, and you talk about BAATN in there, and there was a line there which was, BAATN is an island within a sea of others' discomfort. And I just thought that was really quite a powerful statement, really. But also, just when you were talking then, I was just thinking about that idea of creating that safe space amongst all the other discomfort and issues that are that's kind of raised within, the white people and also the white therapy community as well, and creating that kind of network. And I think I suppose it's, from what I understand, it's developed from just being a network as well now to kind of a broader kind of other projects within that as well.
Yeah. I mean, the main focus really is just on gathering together with no agenda. Although when we gather, something happens. I think there's a coming together of people's energies, whichever grouping have come together, and there may be a project or a task, although that's very rarely the case. Although there is a task, and that task is to work on our own internalized oppression, and to develop our voice, which is another theme that I'm quite strong. I talk a lot about developing our voice. So even as people of color, we need to develop our voice as well. And that sea of that sort of in a way, in terms of attachment theory, we're thinking about safety, safe base, safety and exploration, really, isn't it? That's what attachment's about. And these groups offer that potential for a safe space. And again, we're going to have to reevaluate what safe is. What does it mean exactly? And because by any other measure, we are safe, but there's something about the sea of discomforts that we live in, which and that discomfort kind of signals something. It signals danger or something like that. And of course, if you're a person of color, you pick that up, and then then you're preoccupied with that. So it's harder to process your work, your inner work. So
Mm.
the groups really are a way just to kind of come away from that sea of discomforts and just go somewhere where we can work on yourself. And just that very act of doing that, you go back into the world, and that safety exploration thing is really, really important. Just coming in, coming out, coming in, coming out. When you're out, you are a different person, and you will be doing things differently. So that is the task. And there may be more. There's also more kind of tasks, like let's set up a training, for instance, or let's do this consultation. So we do training, consultations, mentoring. Sometimes there's conscious effort about podcasts, creating podcasts and videos, and giving a narrative of our experience, so people can get it. In some ways.
And it sounds like that it's creating that safe space, but there's almost no agenda to it. But then there's things that may come from that, and it sounds like kind of the things that come from that are starting conversations about race in some way, shape, or form, kind of a podcast or whatever it is. Which I think really some of the things you were talking about there is really kind of a lot of the stuff that you talk about in your new book, which is the race conversation. Is your work with BAATN, I presume, kind of some of the motivation that led you to kind of write that book in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, being in BAATN for all those years, I was having race conversations all the time, or I was listening also to other people not having the race conversation very well, or it not working out. And I mean, one of the good things about BAATN, I think, is that it is actually engendering these race conversations in training institutions, I think in particular, and also in other places. And so the people who are having those conversations in training in training institutions, be they students or trainers themselves, or heads of training, they a lot of them are connected with BAATN. So that kind of safety exploration thing is in operation there. But personally, I was going on a sort of journey myself of healing, wounds of racism through therapy initially, and then more importantly through BAATN. I'd attend the groups. I sometimes didn't say anything, but that wasn't really the point. The point was to have a different embodied experience while the conversation is going on. So if other people are having a conversation or you are having a conversation, it doesn't really matter. What matters is, what your body is doing in that space, and almost developing a sense of safety inside you. So, often there's a sense of not being safe inside you, even though outwardly it's not dangerous. So it's really about developing that safety. And I just thought that was a really important idea that sprang from a lot of the other conversations that I was having. And, and when people focused on their bodies, or spent more time, should I say, focusing on their bodies, there was more chance of some kind of integration of what was being said, the actual words themselves, and less need to retreat from the discomfort. So this idea of being sort of directly connected to the intergenerational past was really, really there, really, really apparent. And not just for people of color, I mean, those are the obvious people to target, but it was also in white people as well, that they weren't immune from that intergenerational transmission of stuff, really, from slavery, colonialism, so all of that stuff has just been passed down and handed down. But of course, the race construct dictates that we don't talk about it. We don't, we try to stay away from the distress, and so all of that material really just people were responding to it as I was trying to articulate it in the various groups that I was in.
Mm.
And there was a particular group I'd call a forum, these forum groups where therapists could just attend if they wanted to reflect and take the race conversation deeper. And people seem to really respond to this idea that we're working with trauma, just that very idea. Then they could reframe what their experience in some ways. Oh, well, when we work with trauma as therapists, what do we do? Oh, yeah, we do this and we do that. And so people were able to stay with quite difficult, uncomfortable body states by having a very sort of clear cognitive idea of what they were doing and why they were doing it. So the book really comes out of that. It sort of gives, it sort of gives a sort of an idea that we're doing post-slavery, post-colonial work, and everyone is involved. And also I was also interested in so that was the basis of the book, actually. And as I was writing it, I became very aware of the language of race, and wanting to create new language, but not new, but it's not new at the same time. So it's not a totally alien words, but words that we might already know, that actually talk into that space of comfort and discomfort. And I wanted it to be so I didn't want it to just remain in the therapy world either. And I kind of wanted to make it as clear as possible, which when you read the stuff, it's like deciphering it is a real task, I have to say. The literature on trauma is massive, and there's lots of long words, and it's very, very complicated. Or it seems very complicated, but then when you break it down, it's kind of not. And so a lot of time and effort was gone into sort of actually taking care of people's nervous systems as they went through the book, or respecting that they have a nervous system, and respecting that it actually it triggers when these words come out. Finding other words to talk about the same thing that don't cause less triggering, but is also speaking about the reality as well. So I didn't want to stay away from the reality of race. So a lot of that thinking and those ideas have come into the book to allow people to get it, whatever that word means. And I think there's a sort of mind version of getting it. A sort of, yes, I understand the cognitive, and that clicks into there, and I can see the little hole, and that goes into there. But there's also I think a body getting it, which is a whole other deal, which often takes quite a lot of investment, actually, of time, sometimes quite a lot of time, and also a decision kind of has to be made by people about whether they want to put that time in and whether they want to work through that. But actually working through that, actually, what my experience is that actually working through that, working beyond the discomfort, actually, there's a lot there that's actually really, really useful and beneficial for people. So it's not just hard work for the sake of hard work, but there's something behind. There's a sort of, I don't know, healing, transcendence, something. Your body can just relax a little bit more. Racism still exists, so we can't say it doesn't. But and if you're going to feel safe, if you're going to feel unsafe, having that more of a reality safe, it really is safe, rather than rattle feelings, and really trying to kind of gauge reevaluate safety, reevaluate what that means.
Mm.
So that's sort of the nub of the book.
And there was some really interesting themes in there in terms of just picking up on what you were talking about, because I know in the book it talks about, or you talk about, focusing on that internal shift, that kind of physical, embodied shift maybe, and that the focus on that sometimes then helps maybe with the external shift by working through that internal aspect of things. And then I think the other interesting thing, I think, which is later on in the book, is there is some conversations between you and different people about race, and the different things that come up for people within that. And I think that's where it's not just focused on, as you say, therapy, but actually on those broader conversations actually around race in different aspects of people's lives. And I think those two aspects really stood out for me when I was reading the book.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I knew I didn't really want to write a therapy book for therapists, but I am a therapist and I live in the therapy world, so I couldn't really avoid it. And but I also wanted to get away from the he said, she said in the therapy room, that kind of dialogue, to just ordinary folk going about their business and what they experience in their world. I mean, the people I've been speaking to are on a journey, so they have made a sort of commitment in some ways to go on this journey. So they're not ordinary people in that sense, but they've gathered enough of their experience and their thoughts to be able to put some of it into words. And actually, going through that I thought, oh, well, I'm just going to just read, interview some people. I've got this idea, and I just want to, kind of rubber stamp this idea by someone talking about it in some way, and that actually the conversations will be a backup for what I thought about previously. But that's not how it kind of worked out. So it worked out that actually I was doing a lot of learning along the way, and the people had stuff to say in their own right, regardless of what I was trying to say. So the conversations they've got lots of layers and levels to them, which I don't go into in the book in that much detail, but they do make they'll make interesting, people sort of go through the narratives and have a discussion about the narratives. That would be really interesting thing for people to do. Another aspect of the book is actually getting support as well, and towards the end I talk a lot about that. And actually, the race conversation itself is resource phobic. There's a sort of resource phobia, embedded in the race construct. Getting help, and there are valid historical reasons for that. Moving towards empathy for Black people comes at a price for white people. Sometimes, not that long ago, they were also seen as Black people and then treated the same. They were also hounded and driven out of countries. So there's a huge consequence, I think, for white people and people of color to attend to the hurt parts of their experience of race. Getting resources is a sort of way to getting closer to that hurt experience. So it can be an effort, really, to find. I mean, there's a lot of places that people can go, but it's a really difficult. It's a transition to actually move your body into that space. And but it's quite an important thing to do, because I don't think it's not something you can do on your own very easily. Think your way through, and having better race conversations by thinking your way through it. It's a body experience, and it's a body experience with other bodies, so they do need to be present. Other bodies need to be around when you're working this stuff through. Obviously, there's stuff you can do on your own. You can read and do stuff, But ultimately, it's really about, with these bodies in the room, can I still function? Can my mind still work when we're having the raised conversation? And the more people put themselves in those situations, the more they find that they're able, that their minds just work properly, and they don't need to ask the question, "What do I need to do?" Because it will just become obvious. Just become, your body will know what it needs to do, because it's already, it's acclimatized itself to this area that we're not supposed to go into. We're just not. And so there is I've entitled the book "The Raised Conversation," but as you probably realize, there's not much talking going on in terms of what people are saying to each other. And I don't go into that very much, or I don't go into, well, what should you say if someone says this or someone says that. Because if you don't know what to say, then you haven't got it. And there's a series of things that you need to do in order to put your body into a space where it does.
It's almost like the pre-steps before you are able to have the conversation. Yeah. No.
And it's very much like any other condition that people come into therapy. They often want. It's often around relationships, isn't it? I can't do this. I want to do that. I want to be with this, but I want better relationships. Basically, that's what most people are after, even if it's just with themselves. But then you're going to have to dialogue with other people in a different way than you are before you came into therapy. So it's a similar idea of working through something to get to a place where it just becomes natural to be in a relationship in a particular way, or a way that you would want to. Of course, there are dangers in racism. So, if you're having a conversation and it really is dangerous, then there's no point in you staying and trying to work it out. Get the hell out of Dodge. But a lot of race conversations don't have real, that real present danger there.
So, and that goes back to that idea of discomfort and uncomfortableness, which may feel very, very unsafe, but that may be different from what you're saying to maybe a very threatening situation, which should be, avoided.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, so your book is available now, and I presume people can get that on Amazon and the usual kind of other places where you can get books. So we're kind of coming to the end of the interview now, but I was just wondering, kind of to finish off with what plans that you've got now. Kind of what is it next for you in terms of your career as a therapist and author? Have you got any more books in the pipeline?
I don't have any books, but it feels like a lot of the ideas are quite nascent in their, they're kind of new in some ways, and so I suspect I'll be developing that further, maybe trying to make it, try to sort of condense it down even more to make it more straightforward for people, and to continue, talking about the ideas with people in conferences and things like that. So I suspect I'll be doing a lot of that. It'd be great to write another book. The process of writing this one was there's a lot of hurdles, just on a sort of writing level. But I've developed a sort of way of doing it that's a bit quicker. So I don't know what it would be, but that would be fantastic. I think the network, the BAATN, the Black African Asian Therapy Network, is something I'm working on more. What would be fantastic would be to maybe create a training, really, that really has a lot of these ideas at its heart, and also to also to maybe kind of widen the influence really of BAATN on the therapy profession itself. I think we've already had quite a bit of an impact, and things are in the shouting at each other stage a lot of the time in various places, and I think that's just how it is. But I think there are also some shifts. I think ideally, I guess the holy grail would be sort of convincing the powers that be in government that actually committing some finance, some serious money to black mental health over a period of time, we're talking about 20 years here, something like that, is would be a worthwhile investment. And that may be some time off, but that would really get to the heart, I think, of this in terms of giving people access. And also not giving just people access. I think there is access in various quarters, but there's a lot of services that come up. They live for a year or two, maybe 3, maybe sometimes 5, 10. Over the course of that time, they change their remit, or they die, and then another organization comes up and repeat what they've just previously done in the previous organization. So that cycle sort of feels like something's happening. It feels like, oh yes, money's going into it, and it's millions of pounds, and this is what we're doing as a government to meet this need. But actually, it's just a continuation, basically, of the cycle of racism and the race construct. So
almost feels like tokenism, really.
Yeah.
And also, there is no consistent strategic plan to offer or financial support to offer those people and communities. And I think that issue probably spans a lot of different communities as well around mental health.
Yeah. But I think there is a rational response to working with the impact of colonialism, I think, in particular, as well as other things. It's rational to put some money into supporting people to recover from the trauma. It doesn't feel rational. It sort of feels like pampering, perhaps, to some, but it feels very rational to me. Of course, a BAATN may or may not have an influence on that, but there are other organisations who are working along those lines, which BAATN is connected to. But that would be the holy grail for me. But in the meantime, just chipping away.
Yeah. Well, they sound like some fantastic goals for the future, Eugene. And if Therapists Connect can help in any way in terms of getting the word out there around any campaigns or anything like that, then please let us know.
Thank you.
I have just put on the bottom of the screen the details for BAATN. So if anybody is interested and wants to find out more, then you can go to that website. And just leaves me just to say thank you very much, Eugene, for coming and doing this interview. I really enjoyed connecting with you and talking about all the work that you've been doing. And this hour's flown by, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Brilliant, thank you. And goodbye to everyone who's watching.